Our next section on fintech in 2021 coming to you live from Vilnius. We've got a fireside chat talking about venture investments in crypto and the digital assets industry. So we're going to be having a discussion looking at what are the issues about transparency on the blockchain, how is that affecting investments. We're going to be talking about how much of the blockchain is hype, what's up with the speculative market right now. How can this speculative and very volatile market be made more bearable for your regular investor? We're going to look at the effect that founders have as well, and that their presence adds, and how does it add credibility to a particular investment. And of course, we need to reflect on NFTs and how they are changing and what is their real purpose in the marketplace today. Our moderator for this session is Uldis Teiraudkalns, and he is CEO of NextPay, a Vilnius-based fintech startup providing banking infrastructure for the digital assets industry. He's also co-host of the podcast Pursuit of Scrappiness. It's a podcast based in the Baltics, talking to different entrepreneurs and startup founders to give them very practical advice for the future. Uldis, are you there, sir? Can you hear me? How are you today?
Hey, doing great.
Doing
nice
good.
to be here.
Nice, thank you. Are you looking forward to the talk? Everything's good?
Yeah, indeed. I'm excited.
Okay, very nice. Well, without further ado, let's do it. Let's start the discussion.
All right. Thank you for the introduction, Louis. So let's kick off this chat today about venture investing in crypto. I have with me Sang H. Lee. Hey, Sang.
Hey, guys. Hey, everyone.
So Sang is the CEO and co-founder of a digital assets management firm, Vega X Holdings. And he's formerly an investment banker at BNP Paribas. Coming from New York, now working a lot in Seoul, in Korea. So he's here to join me to chat about investing in crypto today. How are you, Sang? How are things in Korea?
Good, Uldis. Things in Korea are really interesting right now, right? Like the regulatory regime is changing around crypto. The regulatory regime is changing around COVID. So it's a very dynamic time, to say the least, right now in South Korea.
Yeah, and there's an extra attention because everyone has watched Squid Game and believe that they're like an expert of Korea now, and then making opinions and
Yeah.
and comments, right?
Yeah. I mean, what happened with Squid Game is fantastic. A lot of those, I guess, the actors that showed up, they were only domestically famous, but now they're globally famous. And a lot of the games, childhood games, came out, right? Like and like showed the world like what Korean people played when they grew up. And what's really funny is that first game where the doll turns around. That doll is actually it's a character from Korean textbooks. So there's always a girl and a boy, and then they're doing something, and then in the textbook they describe it. But that's the girl from those textbooks, and I think somebody said, "Wow, that's like a real throwback, right, to their youth."
I can imagine. Yeah, for me it was just a girl. Anyways, moving on into crypto. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was when making investments into crypto. There's
Yep.
a few ways that you can do it, right? You can buy an equity in a company that is developing something interesting. You can buy tokens of an ecosystem or of a company. So I wanted to go to chat about some pros and cons about investing in equity versus tokens, as obviously
Yep.
there's quite some differences there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the whole, the ICO boom and bust, and the idea of tokenization has changed the kind of very dynamics of how shareholder rights and economics work, right, at a corporation, or in the crypto term, what they call a DAO now, which is a decentralized autonomous organization. And the traditional protections that typically investing in equity has, that's important too, right? When you think about shareholder rights, when you think about rights to information, or things that you can do if companies get into financial trouble, things of that nature. There are things that are written in law and that are well understood globally on how the investor slash company relationship exists. When we think about the token route, there are pros and cons to that too. And I think one of the big pros that has been shared in the industry is that it's liquid, right? And when you invest in a venture investment in an early stage company with equity, that's not going to be liquid for, call it, 7 to 10 years. But if you think about tokens, it can become liquid pretty much instantaneously, because there are exchanges that support the liquidity for these tokens. And there are less protections because now, you are part of that economy. And, how the profits, or, the value that's accrued from that business is distributed, that goes back into the token. And that's where, we talk about things like token economics, right? Tokenomics, where, how does the value of the protocol, company, DApp, or platform reaccrue back to the token in a virtuous cycle? And that's something that is very new, right? It was company post a profit, you have EBITDA, net income, that goes to the investors. That there's a very clear equation how that goes to equity. But in tokens, I think that is still an evolving discussion. And primarily right now, there is a lot of speculation, and liquidity is one of the reasons that people still do use tokens. And I think I'll add just one more thing to that, is that there are certain business models now, or frameworks, that actually equity won't work. When we think about like decentralized smart contracts, or DeFi, which we'll talk about later, where things aren't being done by a company, but it's being done by code. And then the value of that code needs to accumulate somewhere, and that really requires a tokenized model.
Mm. So I guess the trade-off is that you trade away, let's say, some investor protection and control for explosive returns and liquidity. I guess that's the
Yep.
game. That's the
That's
trade-off.
right. I mean, but the thing is, like I said, the token model is also evolving, right? So there are things called governance, for example, that exists in token frameworks, where if you have enough tokens, or maybe not even enough tokens, where participants can actually propose changes, right? And rules and things of that nature, that get voted in. So in that sense, it's almost more democratic, that everyone kind of has a voice in the business, except like in traditional equity investments, small investors sometimes get less rights or less information rights, right? And the big investors get a board seat, things like that. So I think it is still evolving. But yes, as of right now, I do believe that, a lot of the traditional investor protections don't exist. But I do think, there are different ways that people can participate in a tokenized framework as well.
What about the criticism about front running of different kind of projects and different token sales by big venture capital firms or private investors? In the traditional world, there's very kind of clear steps that are being taken. A lot of information, a lot of transparency. But then in this space, there's sometimes some kind of protocol is going live. Some people get a kind of early access, and then once it goes public, then there's a huge bump, and then God knows what happens. But the criticism is that they just dump the tokens on unknowing, just FOMO based retail investors. So what do you think about this one?
Yeah. I think there are two elements that I would say, which is, people are very upset with regulation. And the thing is, regulations, in actuality, it's a rule book that allows everyone to play by the same rules, right? When you're playing a game, you've basically agreed to the same set of rules. Like if I go on a basketball court and I bring a pistol, that's not going to really make any sense. So we agree that the pistol range is a different game and the basketball is a different game, and there are different rules to this game. And that is really important, and that's still being formed in crypto. The front running element that you mentioned, it happened in NFTs as well. It's happening, with different token project, different, VC groups. Sometimes it's not a phenomenon, right? It's front running was invented in traditional finance, right? The word front running, because you were really literally in front of the ticker. And I think that in this early phase, it's inevitable that we're going to run into vice and things like just negative things. And I think it's still a learning pace. Unfortunately, it does impact real investors. Having said that, as the framework starts becoming more crystallized, I think the second thing that also occurs, which we don't have in traditional finance, but we have in blockchain, is that all transactions are transparent. And what I mean by that is, maybe somebody got a deal, but you can actually see that token transaction, right? You can see big chunks moving, somebody trying to obfuscate something, like you can see it occur. And I do think that type of self-regulation or that type of regulation that evolves in the future will be much more effective than, what we have in traditional finance. Like just as an example, there's a filing, a 13F, where you buy more than 5% of a company, a hedge fund has to report that they own 5% of the company. It goes into an XML database on Edgar, right? Like no one actually knows it's there unless you go look for it. But when we think about the blockchain, you can see it, and there are people watching, right? So I do think the element of self-regulation and virtuous signaling is going to play a bigger role. Like VCs or investors that don't play, by the book, or they're hurting other investors, that's going to naturally kind of transition themselves out. Companies won't work with them anymore. Investors won't support them. So I do think that that's going to occur. There's still things that the industry is learning. But I do believe that the transparent nature of the blockchain is going to help it move much faster than we saw in traditional finance.
So let's assume that you have bought into some projects and haven't dumped at the first opportunity. So what are the ways that you make it kind of more bearable to hold on to these assets in these hugely volatile markets, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is
So,
there any way besides nerves of steel? So
definitely nerves of steel, or what we call diamond hands. You need to have diamond hands, or else industry is not for you. I do think, ironically, to what we talked about in the beginning, right? The benefits of tokenization being liquidity, short-term liquidity, market dynamics. It's really important to take a long-term view on blockchain, because so much of it is driven by sentiment in the short run, right? Because it's liquid. And this is the difference between like an early stage startup company versus early stage, tokenized company. The tokenized company, like let's say it was Amazon, right? Like Amazon at its founding, with the anticipation that the market believes that Jeff Bezos is going to make Amazon what it is today, they will price it as if it was today, right? 20 years ago. That's the problem, right? And then when it doesn't occur in 6 months, people get tired and then they flush out. But in actuality, the value of that platform is still sound, right? The investment rationale of the leadership and the business is still sound. So I do believe that the long-term goal is really important. So when you even think about like the early stage Ethereum or Bitcoin investors, 2017, you think about a lot of the crashes, no one's lost money if they didn't sell, right? Like it's just only gone up. And not saying that crypto only goes up, but if you do have a longer view, it tends to smooth the curve, right? And I do believe that this industry, I'm not a maximalist, is going to require so much more technological contribution for it to succeed. It's more complex than anything that mankind has done before, and I think more and more protocols that are good at certain things will surface, and they're all going to kind of interplay with each other, right? So I do believe that there are value in different tokenized models, and in the future, it's just all going to be seamless. But at least right now, I do believe that having a longer term view is super important. Trying to look at the fundamentals of why this works, not because it's liquid or because their marketing team is really strong, but why is the technology better than something else, right? Like you would look at an angel investment. You look at the founders, you look at the team. Although ironically now there are anon teams in crypto where they'll be funded and you won't know who they are, either because they're decentralized or they're just Twitter handles. That's it.
Well, but
And
at least you can
they get
see,
VC funding.
at least you can see
Yeah,
their work, right? So you can see their
yeah,
code, you can
exactly.
see what
You have to judge it by
their
their code.
ideas are, so you can judge them very, DD is very public, right?
Right. It's very public and it's very judgmental. So it's it's a double edged sword, right? For sure.
Mm. But you mentioned that there's so much speculation on the market. Like, do you have like any kind of gauge on how much of the action on some of the tokens are actual utility and speculation? Because I
Hmm.
mean, it depends like very much on the different tokens. But I remember, for example, I think it was 2 years ago, roughly, there was a big rise in Binance Coin, and
Yep.
it was when they started those initial exchange offerings in which you could only participate with Binance Coin. So
Yep.
that demand was real, right? So people just
Yeah.
bought it to be able to take part. But then on the other hand, there's things that where you feel that there's almost no business happening. There's some kind
Yep.
of hyped project, and there's a huge speculation. Like, do you have like is there any kind of data, or do you have any kind of feeling about how much of the action on the markets is actually driven
Hmm.
by kind
Hmm.
of non-speculative demand?
Hmm. To be completely honest, it's a minority. The majority is speculation, right? The majority is noise. It's marketing. There's a lot of fluff because these things, when we think about blockchain, it's not just a technology. We're you're basically rebuilding economic interactions, and it takes time. So to say one is the winner or this thing is going to be the Ethereum killer, it's a little disingenuous, right? Because there's so much that still needs to be built before things become really useful, and like infrastructure layers, right? So when we think about that, I'd say 95% is probably speculation and hype. But every, I think, technology curve goes through that pain, right? Where 90%, 95% is going to be wrong, and that's also the profile of a VC investor, right? 95% of the time you're going to be wrong, but the 5% or 1% that you're right, it's enough. It's more than enough to make up for whatever occurred in the 95%. And I think that's very similar to what's happening in blockchain. The the interest level, and I think Bill Gates said this too, like the bubble is necessary. The interest level, the talent level, people coming over for maybe riches, but this is like a gold rush, so you want to make picks and shovels. But you need everyone to come over in order to build that infrastructure, right? Even if it's wrong a lot of the time, you need that talent there, you need the capital there. So I don't believe it's necessarily a bad thing. I just think it's a completely new phenomenon because the assets are liquid. Before, when the assets weren't liquid, you couldn't see the losses. So there was nothing to talk about, right? Like it was just, venture investor lost it and then that's it. Like there's no real news unless it's like a big company that goes bust. But here it's like you see the token going to zero, or or somebody absconded with the money or something like that, right? And those kind of things I think are very unfortunate, but I do believe that the 5 to 10% that are building real things are going to be bigger than anything that we can imagine.
One thing you mentioned about liquidity, I think this is also something obviously in traditional finance as well, in traditional startups. At some point, the founders get some kind of liquidity, right? But definitely not
Yeah,
in the first rounds, right?
yeah,
In crypto, it's completely different, right? They
yep,
might have significant holdings of the tokens that they are creating. Um,
yep,
they become immediately liquid.
Yep.
So do you see more opportunities in that or risks? Because obviously with immediate liquidity, they can go on, support other projects, share the success, make donations, and all kinds of good work. But on the other hand, they might be like the sushi swap founder, right, who just
Yeah.
dropped the mic and cashed out and left, and
Yeah.
left the thing for itself. So what do you think is the stronger side here?
So I think, founder vesting, right? When we think about VC investments, that's just an alignment of incentive. It's not to punish the founder, but basically what you're saying is that the founder is the most important person in the business, right? And you need to lock it up, and even employees, they have lockups and things like that. So I do believe that in due diligence or looking at even tokenized projects, lockups are important. It basically, it's not just to lock up riches, but if it's actually riches, it doesn't matter if it's locked up or not, right? Like if it just starts accumulating, then the founder doesn't really care either, because they can sell it in a year, in 2 years, whatever. So the balance is, the founder doesn't have to wait 7-10 years, of course, right? But I still do think that a significant lockup is very important. Where you do have to build alongside with the community, and I do think it's even more important because uh, the model significantly de-risks any large investor or the founder by bringing in this massive community, right? It's not like two VCs that just backed you and then that's it. It's like a lot of people. So in that model, I think alignment of interests are even more important. And I do think there are ways that a lot of companies do it, like using smart contracts and things like that, where it can't be, modified, unless there is like a proposal and people vote to say, hey, the founders deserve more, they can release it. But otherwise, like, lockups, I think, are important. And in this case, like before, you can see the tokens, right? Like you can see if people are trying to finagle it or move it, and then there's uproar. So, but I do believe that the immediate liquidity is not the right path in the token model. All of the basic rules are still sound, right? The people who are creating something should be incentivized long term, but also should be aligned to the success and failure of the platform.
Mhm. So the hotness of this year, NFTs. So
Yeah,
I have been looking at it from the sidelines, and
yeah,
I've seen a lot of stuff that I do understand, and then I've been struggling
hmm
with a lot of stuff, and I've been struggling with these pictures of rocks and apes and all of that stuff, which is kind of like completely useless, kind of on the
yeah.
first glance. And then a couple of weeks ago, I read a Twitter thread from Jason Yanovitz from Blockworks, which kind of started
hmm
making me shine some light. Maybe you have looked a bit more into it, and are
Yeah.
are is there value beyond the speculation on those
hmm
NFTs? Let's not talk about artists, people or some kind of specific,
hmm
like real
Yeah.
original stuff. Twitter
Cases.
first tweet by Jack Dorsey, but let's talk about
Hmm
these completely random pictures.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's not dissimilar from the ICO craze, right? It's a lot of people kind of playing copy and go on specific models. NFTs, it's not new. NFTs have been talked about for 6 years, at least. From a technology standpoint. And then actually, an early company is you probably heard of CryptoKitties. That was like, that didn't make any sense like years ago. Like, why would you buy a fake cat and like take care of the cat or whatever?
Well,
But when
people
you
still
kind
bought
of think
it.
out,
People still bought it.
people still bought it. And I think, if you look at a little bit larger as to the purpose of an NFT, right? It's a digital representation of ownership of an asset. And that ownership cannot be obfuscated. Like, it's not determined by a government office that says, I own this house as a title. I have the NFT, and it proves that I own something. And right now, we only have it in the digital world, like the metaverse, if you will, right? And I think, art and these things, the reason that these things take off, and sometimes in tech, we say vice is the first thing, right? Like bad things are usually the first thing that attracts like new innovative technology because they have nothing to lose. It's like there's no intrinsic risk, right? If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it's like we all know where VR, AR technology got the most backing, like early days, right? So when we think about NFT, it's kind of the same thing. Art and cartoons is really easy to understand. Really easy. But if I told you I was going to use an NFT model to tokenize real estate to create non fungible shares of $100 million building, that would not be a very popular topic. And so I think what's happening in the market is that the audience is being drawn. It's this cycle, right? The audience is drawn to things that people understand, and then people who are building are like, oh my god, I can sell this and people will buy it, and it's just an ape or it's a rock or whatever. Kind of it defeats the larger picture of there's this massive technological shift into non-fungibility for blockchain, right? Like, how do you create unique assets that are, you can't change it, you can't burn it, you can't mint it? Like, how do you create these things in a way that actually has real world impact and potentially in the future impact in the metaverse? Then it starts making sense, right? This is the bubble concept again. We need it to come in so that people that are actually building really, have the firepower to build the stuff that's necessary in the future. But I do believe this is the same thing. 90% of these projects, it doesn't really make any sense. Some of them are cute. Some of them are not even attractive. They're like pixelated, bad pictures, right? And they go for a lot. And I think it speaks in a way. I'm happy for it because it speaks to how much attention blockchain is getting now on a global basis, and people are actually doing it themselves, right? Because you have to connect a wallet in order to get the NFT. So people are actually connecting wallets and stuff. So I'm like, all right, it's moving in the right direction. 90% of it is going to go away. It's going to go away in the next year or so.
Now you mentioned a good one about this pixelated, but I guess I kind of gave up on determining what is good and bad when I spent my whole childhood fighting for each inch of resolution of improvement in the video games that I was playing, only for it all to be completely destroyed by my kid loving Minecraft. It was like, why do you like those blocks? Why do you have to go back like 30 years in graphics? So yeah, but I mean, with these rocks, it's like you make a picture of rock on Ethereum. Somebody takes that same picture of rock and makes it on Solana, and that also the part that kind of confuses me. But I guess when you start thinking about how many people are involved in this area and how many more people are involved in the metaverse, then obviously where there's people, there's statuses, there's collectors, there's stuff that somebody has that you don't have, and then it starts making some kind of sense.
Yeah. It's just for the art side of things, it's that factor, right? It's the status factor. Status factor plus, art has always been a way for large wealth transference, right? And that's a common way it's used in the traditional world as well. And I don't think it's going to be that dissimilar in NFTs, where a CryptoPunk is going to be $36 million. It's like, does it really matter that the CryptoPunk is $36 million? It matters that two rich people that have more than $36 million each want to transfer it to each other for liquidity, right? It's their own exchange, and that's the medium to do it with, the rare item.
Mm. And finally, we didn't mention it too much. So the role of DeFi that is kind of playing out in these capital markets. You can lend your Bitcoin and borrow some other stuff to buy some NFTs, and there's a lot you can do. There's a lot you can do, and you can see on the rates of stable coins, right? How expensive it is to get stable coins as people buy and buy more crypto that is going up. So what role is DeFi playing now in the capital markets, and what do you think is going to be going forward?
DeFi, as a concept, I think was initially created for the disintermediation of traditional financial institutions, right? That's that's the most important aspect of DeFi. It's how do you, which is Bitcoin, to start off with money, right? How do you decentralize money in a way that it's self incentivized to grow, but there is no single point of failure risk or moral hazard, printing more, burning, like doing whatever you want with money, right? Which destroys people's wealth. And then DeFi was an evolution of that, where we have the money now, like we have the E version of money. How do we bank ourselves, right? That's like kind of the big term. Is like, how do you bank yourself? How do you loan out money? How do I borrow money, etc. And right in the beginning, it was the chase for yield, right? Like, because if we just look at in the simplest way, you look at traditional finance, nothing is paying. Banks aren't paying interest. Equity markets, get out of here, right? Like it's a joke. And when we're thinking about all of these factors playing, people just want their money not to depreciate. At this point, people aren't like greedy at all. In the beginning, you had crazy what they call stables making 150%, and annually. And also the assets that you're mining or staking is appreciating at the same time, right? So people became millionaires overnight with this whole DeFi boom. But in actuality, it's still the simplest concept, right? It's lending and borrowing. Like that's all it can really do right now. And I think there's still a lot to be had. And the NFTs will play a role in that because there's this new asset class that's going to move money, right? And
And you
in
could use it for
reality,
collateral, I
DeFi,
guess. Yeah.
you can stake it and then you can borrow money, right? So I think in the future, a lot of our financial transactions will be driven by DeFi. And DeFi being not this kind of holy grail of things, it's just a smart contract, right? It's a contract that's locked on the blockchain and it does certain financial functions instead of a teller. That's effectively it, right? Instead of an ATM, I put it on code. And we've all agreed that Web 3.0 will be digital money. So in order to interact with digital money, you don't have an ATM, you have a smart contract, right? And that, I think, is going to be a very interesting transition where we move toward a trustless model, where we can transact with other people without a third party. I think that's going to be huge, right? If we think about the simplest function of DeFi, if I can repatriate money, to a different country without a counterparty for forex or clearing, that's just that's a massive opportunity as well. So I do think DeFi is here to stay. It has its own problems. People get hacked, things like that. It's going to improve. And I think we're all going to be using it in the next decade. We just won't know it yet.
Hopefully, we don't have to use it on Ethereum, or Ethereum
Yeah,
fixes their.
exactly.
If Ethereum fixes their shit. I saw somebody yesterday paid $400,000
Yep.
worth of Ethereum for a
400,000.
failed transaction.
Yep.
Well,
It
it's
didn't
nice
even
that
go
you
through.
have. It's nice that you have
400,000. Yeah.
ether to blow. Let's call it like that.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right, so I think on this note we can wrap it up, and thanks Sang for sharing your thoughts. It was fun,
Yeah, for sure.
and good
It's fun
luck
talking. Okay.
rocking those
Thank you.
markets.
Thank you. This.
Very
Thank
good.
you. It was a pleasure. Thanks everyone for having me on.
Uldis, thank you very much for your moderation of that session today, mate. I've got a couple of quick follow-up ones there. I'm really interested in this last content that came out about NFTs. Do you agree that like NFTs are just more like a proof of concept for when it actually turns out that they're representing a physical thing? When do you think that's going to be the real value of the NFT when we eventually decide it can represent something, ownership of something physically?
I'm not so sure about that, because currently the most value and most action is happening with purely digital stuff, and there have been different kind of blockchain based initiatives to record ownership of physical assets or of real world assets. Potentially NFT is a good way how to solve that. But as the world is turning more and more digital, I think most of the value and of the action is actually going to be for stuff on the metaverse, as Sang mentioned it.
Okay, I see where you're coming from with that. We need a way to show ownership online, and NFTs are one potentially very good way to do that. Talk a little bit more about one of the topics, which was the importance that founders stick around, and the importance of founders being involved to provide credibility for a venture, and that there's a balance there that we want our founders to stay around. This tells us that someone's got skin in the game, but it's also not very good if the founders are locked in for 10 years or longer as well. Talk about that balance a little bit.
Well, it differs very much about what kind of founders are we talking about, right? If we're talking about founders of a centralized company, then obviously we are interested that they are, in it for the long run. If we're talking about somebody who came up with a decentralized protocol, we have a very good example in Bitcoin of a founder who just disappeared, and I think most people in the industry will agree. Thank goodness it happened that way, because now there's no CEO of Bitcoin to go to complain about something that you don't like. So everyone's kind of in the same boat and has the same rules and has the same incentives. So if we talk about decentralized projects, then centralized projects, then obviously this is clear that they are driven by visionaries, and for their visions to come true, they need to stick around. I think the crypto markets allow us for extra benefits of and kind of relief of being a founder. You can get to wealth faster. You can continue building, and most people that are building stuff don't do it for the money. So it's not critical for them to get paid, but it's critical for the ecosystem that they have money to invest in other founders, and they can help others out. So that's what they mostly do when tech founders get some money. They actually usually give it to more founders and kind of have this whole ecosystem reproduce. So in crypto, I think that's a big benefit. But we have to be careful, as Sang emphasized. There need to be clear incentive and limitation systems, so that it doesn't happen that because in crypto you can have huge success overnight, and that is like unlike the traditional startup world, where overnight success means that probably the company has been grinding for like 5 to 7 years. In crypto, there is actual overnight success. There is stuff that didn't exist last week, which is worth hundreds of millions already this week. I mean, it might be worth zero in a few weeks again, but the fact is that the velocity is so fast that there have to be limitations to keep the people who create these things accountable and kind of incentivized to see it through.
All right. Very interesting. Uldis, thank you very much for your comments and for your moderation of our Fireside Chat. Hope you have a good day. See you next time. And thank you very much for watching, and we're going to see you in the next session.
Thank you. Bye.